Good afternoon. Welcome to today's webinar. This is Melissa Hurt from the Community Technical Assistance Center and Managed Care Technical Assistance Center of New York State. This is the first webinar in our new series called Creating Successful Group Experiences. This series was created by our clinical team and Community Collaborative Board here at CTAC to help providers identify ways to engage in creative and dynamic ways to support and empower their participants. We know that one type of treatment approach is groups. Through group attendance, participants may gain the ability to view themselves and their situations more accurately, increase feelings of empowerment and improve coping skills, and may have a reduction of feelings of isolation and increased feelings of esteem by being surrounded by others in similar situations. In this series, we will have webinars on engaging prospective clients in group participation, group processes, facilitation, and group outcomes and performance indicators. You can access the full listing of the series on the CTAC website at ctacny.org. Today's webinar will cover best practices regarding the preparation of participants to be in group, focusing on the need to ensure a good match between the goals of the group and the felt needs of the participant. Before we get started, I want to take a moment to orient everyone to the WebEx system so you know how to participate in today's event. Please note that upon joining the webinar, you have been placed on mute to avoid any background noises that may distract others from listening to the presentation today. If you come across any technical issues during today's event, please chat to the host who will be able to assist you. We will have the opportunity to submit questions for the Q&A portion of today's presentation by utilizing the chat box feature, which is located on the right-hand side of your screen. If it is not visible, click the dialog bubble on the top right toolbar and it should appear. In order to ensure that we are able to answer as many questions as time permits, we are requesting that you send in your questions at any point during the webinar, and we will address them during the Q&A portion of today's webinar. We are very excited to have Dr. James Rodriguez with us here today. Dr. James Rodriguez is a senior research scientist at the McSilver Institute for Poverty Policy and Research and an adjunct lecturer at the NYU Silver School of Social Work. He works in the Step Up program, a group life skills and mentoring program for youth from poverty-impacted communities who are at risk of dropping out of school. His work at the Institute includes direct practice, training, supervision, and research with an eye to developing evidence-informed practices in the area of child and adolescent mental health. He is also a licensed psychologist and social worker in private practice. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Melissa, and I'm really happy to be kicking off this series that the CTAC has put together. And for today's first session, we're going to be talking about how to prepare participants for group. Our objectives for today So our objectives today, I want to provide some background on the need for doing a thorough pre-group preparation for all group members, and if not a thorough one, and I realize also that time constraints and burdens at agencies can often interfere with the possibility of even doing pre-group interviews. But I want to talk about the basics of doing pre-group interviews and really advocate for doing them in some form and really putting some thought into how you do it. I also want to identify the advantages of group as well and the reasons why people drop out. And pre-group interviews can go a long way in reducing dropouts. And then lay out and identify a process for pre-group interview, at least looking at the critical features of what a pre-group interview should include. The presentation is going to be broad. As Melissa said, I primarily work with adolescents, but I've also done some work with young adults. But I'm going to try to keep the presentation broad enough so that the ideas and principles that we talk about really can apply to groups with any groups of people along the developmental spectrum from childhood to adulthood. And also broad enough to address a variety of settings and types of groups. So why prep? Why is it so important? It may be obvious, but as Melissa said, and as this whole sort of group series will focus on, group has a number of advantages over individual forms of support and therapy, and whatever you think of that you do, whether you're doing individual therapy or counseling or providing support, case management, whatever it is that you're doing as a helper, the advantages of group over individual work are many. And it's important to consider those advantages, because when you are preparing people for a group, you're not only thinking about the specific issues that the group might be formed for example, dealing with anxiety or talking about domestic violence or talking about LGBTQ issues. There are those sort of content areas or specific areas that the person might be working on, but the advantage of group is that it allows the individual to also work on a number of other things, a number of other areas. That group itself as a process has these advantages: overcoming feelings of isolation. It facilitates receiving and giving support. Both of those are important. It's not only that the person is learning how to get support from others, but also how to give support to others. It promotes communication skills, increases interpersonal skills. It provides an opportunity for people to take chances, to take risks in communicating with others and opening up. And it obviously provides an opportunity for people to learn from others. So it's important when you're preparing people for group to identify not only what they can get out of group because of the specific area that you're working on, but also because group itself has a number of different advantages. So before we go into the reasons, the specific steps and critical features of group preparation, I just want to highlight a few of the challenges for group engagement and focus on some of the common reasons for people who drop out of group. And these are some that have been noted. So people, and I raise these because these are reasons for people to drop out, but they are also indicators of people who are not a good match for group because, again, the group process itself becomes difficult for people who demonstrate any of these characteristics. So people who are less psychologically minded, that is, they're unable to or really process, they need to have a certain level of self-awareness and an ability to communicate their internal processes. People who are less psychologically minded don't do well in group. It might be an obvious point, but people with greater psychiatric symptomatology, that does include, of course, people with serious personality disorders and or serious psychiatric problems going to schizophrenia and other areas. So, and as well as people with severe forms of depression and other areas. So people with greater psychiatric symptomatology have a difficult time with group. And also people who have greater target symptoms. And then people who either demonstrate very hostile ways of interacting with others or very, very passive ways. Again, we're talking about the extremes because, of course, in many ways, group provides an opportunity for people to actually work in those areas. So, but in the extreme, people who are overly hostile or overly passive in their interactional styles are going to find it very difficult to participate in group. And then, of course, people who tend to have somatic complaints or who tend to somaticize their symptoms have a hard problem in group. And, of course, it may be obvious, but the reason for that is that people who somaticize their symptoms are more likely to talk about their physical complaints rather than, again, being able to connect to the intrapsychic and intrapersonal processes that are going on for them. So, so these are some of the folks who oftentimes have a real difficult time in group. And then a couple of things about some other things that a pre-group interview can help with is trying to overcome concrete barriers. So when you're doing a pre-group interview, sometimes barriers such as time, transportation, and childcare become an issue. But one of the things that's important to note, and this is something that we've often described and talked about in all of our work at the CTAC around engaging clients and participants into any form of treatment, is the idea that concrete barriers can often be masks for underlying concerns. So oftentimes, if a person is fearful or reticent to join a group for other reasons, they will typically use concrete barriers as their main reasons for not wanting to participate. So it's important in a pre-group interview to try to identify and talk about what those underlying concerns could be, and I'll talk about those in a minute. However, it is important to recognize that for certain groups, it is very important to understand that concrete barriers are going to be an important piece, an important barrier to getting people to participate. So, for example, running a group for women who are domestic violence victims or parent support groups. Those, you should anticipate that concrete barriers will be there, and you should do stuff to plan for and make sure that you address those barriers for your participants in the pre-group interview. So that's a little bit about concrete barriers. And then more importantly, as I said before, concrete barriers can often mask underlying concerns, and those are the ones that we kind of typically address or talk about in terms of perceptual barriers. That oftentimes what really keeps people from participating or making a decision to join a group might be these perceptual barriers. And in this list here, so it could be emotions like anxiety, expectations, sort of what they expect to get out of group, social norms, beliefs about groups and what they bring, as well as other people's attitudes about participating in group, and then also past experiences that people might have that might, again, negatively impact their decision to join a group. So if they've had past bad experiences with group, they're going to be less likely to want to join a group now unless those past experiences are discussed and talked about. And then just feeling efficacious. And again, that goes back to those goals of groups. So if someone doesn't feel like they're particularly good at talking in front of others or communicating in front of others, and they just don't have a good sense of efficacy around those, group is going to be particularly difficult for them to want to join. I want to focus here also on anxiety because in many ways the pre-group interview and the importance of the pre-group interview is to try to reduce anxieties. And many of the anxieties that, that participants will have in joining group have to do with things like, obviously, self-revelation, sharing about themselves with others in a group. That can be highly anxiety-producing for anyone. Being ridiculed, being rejected by others, and even mental contagion. Sometimes people fear that if they're going to be joining a group, for example, of people who are dealing with depression or dealing with anxiety, that being around other people with depression and anxiety is going to make them more anxious and depressed. So having to overcome those kinds of fears are very critical in the pre-group interview, and one of the reasons why pre-group interviews are important. I want to say a little bit about research on pre-group preparation. So there's a lot of reasons why pre-group preparation is important. One of them is because research shows that they are effective, and the greatest and the strongest effects are for retention and attendance. When you do pre-group interviews, the research shows that people are more likely to stay in group and have better attendance across group sessions. That they tend to have reduced anxiety about groups. So some of the strongest effects are around reducing anxieties, increasing retention and attendance, and then also things like better participation processes, like staying on task, staying on topic, and then increased faith in groups, the belief that groups can be helpful. And then to a lesser degree, some of the other group processes like openness and self-disclosure have also shown moderate effects. There's strong effects for many of the other things I've talked about. There's pretty good effects for therapeutic processes that are critical. So again, building group cohesion, openness, and self-disclosure. And then also the pre-group preparation is also good for establishing the structure by the leader. It's important as early on in the process of group development for individuals in the group to have a connection to the group leader. A pre-group interview can go a long way in helping to build that connection between the group leader and establishing the group leader as the structure at the beginning of groups. So with all that said, the purpose of preparation, Well, first off, I should say, there's a number of common problems with groups that groups experience early on. The common problems in group include things like the incompatibility between the goals of the group and the needs of the individual. There's often high turnover in groups, so any of you who've tried to start groups or run groups know that at the very beginning you might have a lot of drop-off or dropouts. There's also another reason why people have a difficult time in group early on is people have a need for immediate comfort, and sometimes groups do not provide that right away. So, and another common problem that comes up is subgrouping, or people sort of developing cliches or connecting with others outside of group. So these are some common problems that affect groups early on. One of the reasons why group preparation is important is because in some ways it addresses these. One of the major things, though, that group preparation can do is reduce anxiety. It is important that people are given information, people understand what the purpose of the group is. All of these things have the effect of reducing anxiety. It also in reducing anxiety, also has the ability, or the pre-group interview has the purpose of increasing or beginning to develop a working alliance between the group leader and the members of the group. And oftentimes that working alliance is one of the greatest predictors of outcomes in group, in any kind of therapy, but in group therapy as well. That alliance is really critical. So building rapport is another one of the things that's really an important reason why pre-group interviews can be so critical. Reducing anxiety, again, goes back to reducing misconceptions about group. The idea of joining a group can be stressful and anxiety-producing. Just the idea of joining a group can be stressful and anxiety-producing. So giving information and allowing the person to understand what the purpose of the group is super critical. And then this also means, in many ways, anticipating and recognizing that anxiety is to be expected. So one of the things that you can do in a pre-group interview is talk about the anxieties that might increase during group, anticipating them and discussing them and preparing the individual for that. And so again, we can reduce anxieties by giving individuals information about, not only about what the group is going to be for, but all the details about the group, and then some information about the purpose of group and group processes. So, as we talk about some of the critical features of group preparation, we want to sort of be clear that the pre-group interview, the main purpose is to engage the client in shared decision-making around group. In many ways, you're giving them information so that they can make an informed decision about participating in group. And this is very consistent with many approaches out there, person-centered approaches, trauma-informed care approaches, that really look at the importance of empowering participants to be active in their own care. So in many ways, the notion of shared decision-making is consistent with empowering and providing an opportunity for clients to be engaged. The pre-group interview can convey respect for the participant's judgment and intelligence that they have, and it also provides an opportunity for the group leader to demonstrate their expertise in understanding the dynamics of group and what it takes to participate in group and what group is going to entail. And again, it allows the participant to make an informed decision. Short preparation, so what I'm going to be describing in terms of the critical features of group preparation can be done in short form or in long form. But one of the things that we do know is longer form is better. The more group preparation, so research also shows that the more preparation that is done, the better the effects. But as I said before, sometimes we realize that time, constraints, burden, all kinds of issues around caseloads and the amount of time one can dedicate to this are important factors out there in the real world, but it is important to consider some of this work being completed before the beginning of group. So, so these are some of the critical features of a pre-group interview. You want to, of course, describe the purpose of the group, and also explore how the group relates to the person's felt needs, goals, and interests. Explore those past experiences, and then begin to look at the group guidelines and the expectations of the group in advance. So oftentimes that'll be done when group starts, but it's important to begin to lay the foundation for guidelines and expectations and rules before group starts. And then really digging in and aligning the group theme with the participant's needs. What specific goals will the participant work on, both with regards to their symptoms or the specific problem areas that they're dealing with, but again, those group advantages, those group goals that have to do with their interpersonal functioning and abilities. And then you can also provide, if you have available, the pre-group interview is an opportunity to provide samples of a curriculum or materials that you're going to be using as part of the group. And then one of the other things that you can do is consider the opportunity for the person to check out the group if that's appropriate or if that makes sense. We're going to go into each of these, and then we're going to actually show a demonstration of a pre-group interview where we try to touch on each of these areas. So describing the purpose, again, very clearly, you want to state the purpose of the group. You want to state whether, what specifically the group goal is, what area you're working on. It might be, again, the specific reason why the participant is right for the group, whether, again, they're dealing with issues of grief, whether they're dealing with issues of depression or anxiety. So the purpose of the group is to help people with that. It's important, of course, to answer the basic questions: who, what, when, where, and why the group will be taking place. And then being very specific. Is it closed-ended or open-ended? Is it time-limited? And, of course, how much time is it going to take? Or is it going to be an open-ended group? And then, of course, the specific type of group. Is it going to be therapeutic? Is it going to be support? Is it going to be psychoeducational? So, so those are that's the basic information that you want people to have. And again, that's to reduce anxiety because people will be more likely to participate in group if they understand all the details that are associated with it. And then you want to explore the connection between the purpose of the group and the participant. And again, there should be a balance between focusing on the individual's needs with regards to symptoms or support or all of those other kinds of things, but also the reasons why group itself might be an advantage for them. It's important to try to use non-stigmatizing language. Oftentimes in our step-up groups, I shouldn't say oftentimes, actually I should say as a matter of practice in our step-up groups, when we're recruiting students to be in our step-up groups, we actually use the terminology nomination or selection for being in group to be more empowering, as opposed to using the terms like referrals. Referrals often has a clinical connotation to it, and so we try to let people, our young people, know that people have selected them or nominated them to be a part of our group. And then it's important to ask questions. In what ways would a group for X, Y, or Z, whatever purpose it is, be helpful to you? You want to listen, and then you want to summarize and feed that information back. Do you think that would be important to you? That is, connecting to others. This is in reference to the specific goals and the specific advantages of group. So you want to talk about their specific needs, as I said, whether it is coping with stress or coping with depression or living with anxiety, but you also want to connect it to some of the advantages of group. So you want to try to address those as well. So things like, would connecting to others be important to you? Would learning how to cope with depression? So balancing both their individual needs and what group offers. You want to explore past experiences, which, as we said, identify how those past experiences have impacted their attitudes about group, negative or positive. But of course, you want to focus on any negative attitudes that were developed. And you want to address those negative attitudes that could have been developed as a result of past experiences. This, of course, is going to affect their expectations about your group, the group that you're laying out for them. So that's why you want to address those. You also want to use the opportunity to anticipate and address those stumbling blocks. So as I said before, part of the preparation and part of the reduction of anxiety that you can do in a group preparation is to let them know that there might be some questions that come up. People might be puzzled at first. Sometimes group participants might get a little annoyed or angered with the leader of the group simply because they're not getting enough attention. That's just the nature of groups. And also preparing them for the possibility that they might have to wait a little bit before they feel some symptom reduction, and certainly wait some time before the group begins to develop some cohesion. So, when you talk about past experiences and exploring their concerns, it's also an opportunity to prepare them for some of the things that might happen in group and that might take some time to develop. And then you want to preview some of the group guidelines. These are the group rules. Again, in groups, a lot of times group leaders have preconceived ideas about how the rules will be determined, whether the group leaders will do it, whether participants will do it, whether both will be involved. And as I said, I think we're all accustomed to the idea of getting the group involved in developing those guidelines in the first group. But as I said, the pre-group interview is a good opportunity to preview those guidelines with the participants. And again, if there are some group guidelines that are predetermined by the group leader that are important to the group leader, those should be stated early on. And what can be emphasized with regards to group guidelines are some of those things that make participation in group more possible and more effective. So you want to emphasize guidelines like the importance of open and honest communication and trying to avoid those things that can interfere with group participation on their part or on other parts. Again, you also want to tie in the group guidelines to those opportunities that group offers. Group offers the opportunity to reveal intimate aspects of themselves. That could be anxiety-producing, but it's also something that you want to try to reinforce. That group provides that opportunity for them to do that in a safe way, to take risks, to communicate about things that they might not be used to communicating in front of others about, and try new ways of communicating. So as you're going over the group guidelines, it's important to process both those non-negotiable parts of group participation, but also highlighting those things that will make group more effective for the participants. And then, of course, it's important to talk about confidentiality. One of the, obviously that we all know, one of the sort of big difficulties in a group, or one of the major risks of group participation, is someone's confidentiality being broken, not because of the group leader, but because other group members may break it. So, of course, it's important to talk about confidentiality. And, of course, with regards to confidentiality, all the normal limits are there, danger to self and others. Those are things that have to be disclosed. But it's important to be particularly mindful of certain groups when it comes to confidentiality. People at high risk. So, for example, victims of domestic violence or people who are HIV positive. These are groups for whom confidentiality can be an extremely important part. It is for everyone, but it is heightened for certain groups because the possibility that information might get out about them can be devastating. So it's really important to address issues of confidentiality with certain groups. Also important to cover third-party communications, so those mandated clients and being able to talk about the limits of confidentiality for those clients who might be mandated. And then the heightened possibility of extra-group communication. So it's also important in the discussion about confidentiality to talk about how people can communicate with each other outside of group. One of the advantages of group is that it can lead to connections among group members that can lead to communications outside of group, support outside of group. It's important to have that discussion during the pre-group interview about the limits of that and both the advantages and the disadvantages, or some of the cautions about extra group communication. And again, that can be an important aspect of group participation and an important outcome of group participation is that people develop supports outside of group, but also doing it in such a way that contributes to that ongoing group cohesion, so that if outside group communication is creating the possibility that in-group communication is hindered because people are developing cliques as opposed to support, that's an important thing to give people the heads up about and set some guidelines around. And then aligning with felt needs. So as I said before, at the beginning, you want to begin to have some discussion about how the group meets individual goals and needs. But in this section, you may want to drill down from that initial connection to specific needs and explore the benefits and challenges of group participation and cover the goals for treatment. How do you think a group like this can help you get to your therapeutic goals, tying it into maybe their individual therapy or their larger therapeutic goals, as well as what might be some obstacles to participation. What are some things that might get in the way of your participating in group? Having those discussions will give you a better sense of how the group aligns specifically with the felt needs around their overall goals and as well around their group goals and the reasons why group participation might be particularly helpful for them. And then you can also provide an overview of materials. So if there are materials that are being used for your group, whether it's a specific curriculum that you're using, a psychoeducation curriculum or other kinds of materials, sharing them or giving them some sense of what materials we'll use. You can also develop brochures. So when we talk about pre-group preparation, the pre-group interview is often the most effective ways, but people are also getting very creative about ways that they do pre-group preparation. So sometimes developing brochures or developing very simple cheat sheets that give people some idea of what group entails and how they might benefit from group could be done in conjunction with the pre-group interview. But then also, again, samples of the materials that are going to be used throughout the group. And then you review those as necessary. And again, if there's materials that you're specifically using, whether it's a workbook or some other form of other form of intervention that you're using, providing the participants an opportunity to look at those would be critical in the pre-group interview. And then another aspect, and again, this is if applicable, and it should be determined in advance by the group leader, but an opportunity to check out the group. And it would be important if you're going to do a checkout, an opportunity to visit the group is to discuss the expectations for the visit and provide realistic expectations about that visit. So going back to what I was saying before, it may be difficult for someone, giving someone an opportunity to join a group that is already going on, or giving someone an opportunity to join a group at the beginning with the opportunity to opt out. Of course, participants always have the ability and the decision to drop out is theirs, but giving them the heads up about what group can bring and can't bring in a brief visit. So it's important, and it is important to get, because of that, and important to get or to try to get a commitment to an extended visit. A one-time visit is only going to provide very limited information about how a group is developing, how it acts, how it performs. So trying to get someone to commit to more than one visit would be critical. So with that said, we have a small video demonstration of a pre-group interview. A couple of things I want to mention about it. First, this is a role play, but it's not scripted. In other words, the person who is being interviewed, the male in this video is me, Jim Rodriguez, and the potential participant is Sabrina. Again, it's role played and not scripted. What we mean by that is Sabrina was given some details about her role, but we did not script it out. So my attempt to try to address all of those critical features of the pre-group interview were done fairly naturally. And this is not meant to be a perfect example. And because of that, I invite you to critique, and actually afterwards we're going to talk about what could have been done better and what may need to be done moving forward. And And it is edited, so we've kind of cut it down to about 6 minutes for your review. As you watch, definitely jot down things that you think are important for us to note, because we'll chat about it afterwards. But the full version of the group interview is actually going to be available on the group series website. So there's a website for this group series, and some of the materials, or all of the materials for each of these webinars is going to be on there, including the full version of this interview. And so very quickly as a setup, Sabrina is the participant, or the potential participant. I'm actually going to be talking to her about a program that we've actually implemented in the community through the CTAC called KEY, Knowledge Empowers You. And it's a program that we developed for transition age youth, that's young people in the 18 to 24-year-old range who have been in the mental health system. And it's a protocol that we've developed, a group intervention that we developed to help people with that transition from into young adulthood, from young adulthood into adulthood. And so I'm going to be talking to her about her participation in this group. And as I said, the full, this clip is about 6 minutes long, and please jot down your thoughts as you go along. Okay. As I mentioned, this was not meant to be a perfect example. People may have noted some difficulties, and actually what we want to do now is just engage you all in a little bit of a conversation. So please, hold on, I'm trying to, okay, so first, please chat in. What are some potential facilitators to participation? In other words, what are some things that you saw from the video and from Sabrina that you think might increase the likelihood that she would join or want to join this group? So please take a moment just to chat in your comments or thoughts around this, around her interest and or likelihood to engage in group. Okay. So I'm seeing quite a few comments come through. Thank you. Keep them coming. But I'm seeing things like that she identified something that she got out of prior group. Using specific examples of topics that will be explored probably helped her visualize the group. And let's see, what are some others here? So I also see that the age of people in the group may help her to join in. The difference in ages may have been an issue for her before. Okay. Giving a specific example of some of the kinds of decisions tackled in the group that might relate more specifically to Sabrina's situation. Okay. Oh, there's a question here, is that something that she can take home with her? So yeah, the example that we gave, that would be a decision. We'll get to that in a minute, but I should say, so the question is, I'll try to handle some of these questions specifically. So someone asked, is the material that I give her something that she can be sent home with her to keep a look at? Again, that's a decision that you as a group leader can make. And should be made in advance. So if you think that giving the work group, in this particular example, giving the workbook out would be something that would be helpful, and you have a pretty good feeling that you'll get it back, that would be a decision to make. And as I said, you should make it prior and be clear about it. And if you think that that is important, so in this particular case, I should say in this particular situation with our key group, we typically don't let them take it home with them because, first off, they're sort of expensive to put together. Well, I shouldn't say expensive to put together, but there is some expense to putting together. But also, we feel that the work group itself, the workbook itself, is not effective unless you're in group. And I think if that's the feeling that you have, or the way you've developed your materials, then you should be clear about that. That in order for the workbook to be effective, you need to be in group. Then you should be clear about that and state that in advance. Okay, help with brainstorming certain decisions that she's made. Okay. Giving specific examples of some kinds of decisions she's tackled in group that might relate more specifically to Sabrina's situation. I think in some of these, what I'm seeing with the comments is what may also get in the way. So actually, I would actually like to also have you chat in. So I saw some of the points that people made with the facilitators for group participation, but I also want you to sort of identify, if you can, some possible barriers now. So please feel free to chat in obstacles or barriers that you think, given what you saw from Sabrina, that might impact her ability to participate or decide that she wants to participate in the group. Okay. So I see one, and I'll try to address these as they come in. So someone says perhaps using more client-centered talk and meeting them where they are and using easy-to-understand language. And that's totally understandable, absolutely. And I think, as I said, this wasn't meant to be a perfect example, so I'm glad that you raised that. So one of the important aspects of the pre-group interview is that oftentimes, if you're limited in time and you kind of have to describe what's going on, it makes it more difficult. One of the reasons, as I mentioned earlier, the reason why more time can be more effective in a pre-group interview and should be allocated is so that you don't feel rushed. A lot of times, and I'll be very honest, in this example, the full example only lasts about 20 minutes. That's enough time to do these very simple descriptions, and it's very difficult to be client-centered in 20 minutes if you're trying to provide information. So I'm glad someone made that remark, because in order to be client-centered and in order to provide the client or the participant more time to reflect, to get their views, to allow them to really share their thoughts and feelings about group participation, more time is needed. So again, I'm actually very happy that I got that, that critique. What are some other obstacles? Yeah, again, similarly, big words. So I'm getting a lot of feedback around big words that are being used, and often using clinical language, maybe non-stigmatizing language. Again, totally acceptable feedback. And one of the reasons why you want to do the pre-group interview, but also prepare yourselves for the pre-group interview, is to think about how the information is going to be given and in what ways the information can be given in either more participant-friendly language and language that can be easily understood. Maybe explain ways that this group experience might differ from a hospital experience. Not mandatory, more relaxing environment. Yeah, point well taken. I'm not sure. So one of the remarks I saw says, again, maybe explain ways that this group experience might differ from hospital experience. Not mandatory, more relaxing environment. If you can clarify that remark, I'd like to get a little clarification, because I think that, are you saying there that in a hospital experience it might be mandatory and how you deal with that can be very different as opposed to it being a voluntary participation? If that's the case, yes, absolutely, that will definitely make a difference. One of the things, though, I would still say is that the pre-group interview can be important, even if it is mandatory that the individual participate in the group. A pre-group interview still can achieve some important outcomes, like preparing the participant, trying to reduce anxiety. If it's mandatory, you can try to deal with that in the pre-group interview and actually maybe even establish some rapport around it being mandatory. Again, if that's what the remark was addressing. But in general, if you're dealing with a group that's mandatory, there's nothing that I've described here where it would be contraindicated to do a pre-group interview even if it's mandatory. Okay. Yeah. Someone says here, I liked how you reinforced her determination by stating that she can choose to, how actively to participate. Again, that's a decision point, and trying to balance those two things, giving people choice to participate, but also being able to clarify that group can be an opportunity for people to push themselves, especially for folks who are working on it. So that could be a goal in group itself. The idea that trying to share more of yourself and taking chances can be a wonderful opportunity in group. Any others? These are wonderful, this is wonderful feedback and some great ideas. I'm going to move on because we're running short on time, but I want to take a quick moment to review a few things. So as far as reviewing what happened in that video, a few facilitators to participation. Again, there's some alignment with groups, with the goals of the group. As you saw in Sabrina's, in this role play, there's some alignment with the goals of the group. She has had an opportunity to participate in groups in the past and saw that participating with others gave her some ideas of connecting with others who were going through similar things. I didn't see any major concrete obstacles. There were no major concrete obstacles for Sabrina to address. And her past experience with group was neutral to positive. Again, she mentioned some things that might have been difficult, but in general, it seemed to be a positive connection that she had to groups in the past. Some of the obstacles that I saw with Sabrina included her anxiety about group participation, and I think some people alluded to that in their feedback. Her anxiety about talking, sharing of herself in front of others. It looked like the severity of her depression would have to be something that we'd have to look at. And her passivity, right? So as far as a group participant, she will most likely be a very passive group participant at the very beginning. This group interview has already given me a clue to that, so I know what to expect from her participation at the beginning of the group, and I also am aware of her anxieties around group, and she's aware that I'm aware. So what the group interview has done for her is help her and I to connect around that, and if she decides to participate in the group, I would have to be aware of, I would already be aware of some of these dynamics for her. Couple of things, troubleshooting. So if I was, some of you alluded to this. Again, this was very brief. I wasn't very client-centered. Again, critique well taken. I would say that to troubleshoot, and I do think that the fact that I wasn't client-centered also could be an obstacle to her participation. So, couple of things to troubleshoot. You know, continue to problem solve. I would probably suggest that another interview with her would be important. Another interview in which I might take that step back and be much more client-centered, much more motivational in my approach to interviewing her. We already considered the checkout, so one of the things that I gave her was an opportunity to come and visit the group. If I did have another group session, another pre-group interview session with her, I would continue to focus more on rapport building. I would do more goal clarification, and again, very much consistent with the feedback, I would be much more client-centered in that approach and much more motivational. I've already given her the basic information, but I would allow her to tell her story a little bit more. And then explore those obstacles, either perceptual or concrete, that might come up. She doesn't have many concrete barriers, but maybe some of her concerns around and fears around group participation. And then one of the other things that's important is a pre-group, a trial interview, and this is different from the checkout. Sometimes another way of doing the pre-group interview is in doing it in small groups. It's almost a trial. So if you have a number of people who have been identified as possible participants in the group, you can do a pre-group trial with a small group, a small subgroup of participants, and kind of check out how they respond to each other and how they interact. Couple of words about how to handle referrals. I say this because it's important that that group be identified as a complement to other therapies. group should never be given or provided simply because the person is either done with individual therapy or their individual therapy is going nowhere. There should be a very clear rationale for why why the person is coming for group and why someone thinks that group is a better match for the individual. So it's important to coordinate efforts between the individual therapist and the group therapist or the group leaders. And again, it's also important, as we said earlier, considering non-stigmatizing language around referrals using the whole notion of nominations or being selected for a group as opposed to being referred. And then just lastly, these are some useful assessments. Some folks, if you're working in a shop that's very evidence-based or that makes measures, these are some measures that are out there. You can look at these and try to find them. None of these, unfortunately, are publicly available, but we just thought we'd list them out here if you're interested in looking them up and finding. But these are all measures that can be used as part of a pre-group interview. I want to thank you all. I apologize. I know the chat in on the video hopefully was helpful in giving feedback. I will say we're out of time, but I'm more than happy to stay for a quick minute and ask folks if there's any last thoughts or questions you might have.
Thank you, Dr. Rodriguez. Now we're going to begin answering some questions submitted during today's presentation. As a reminder, you can still submit questions through the chat box. Our first question is, can you bill for a pre-group session?
So billing becomes a little bit tricky with pre-group sessions, and I know that's a reality for many sites. What we know is that what is critical is all of the things that go into the regulations around billing. So the length of time for the pre-group interview, what is discussed, and how that interview relates to the person's treatment plan has to be included. And there has to be some discussion about the specific goals for group therapy. The sample or the demonstration that I gave would not qualify for being billable because it was very brief. It was only 20 minutes. However, again, if that interview was longer, if there was a more detailed discussion about the group therapy goals, and if there was a more clear understanding of how that particular session would fit into the person's treatment plan, those would be some of the things that would have to be described in the contact to be billable. However, one of the things that when we talk about billability and the importance of billable hours, one of the arguments I would make is that even if it's a small investment of time, because the pre-group interview can be predictive of retention and attendance in group, it might be worth the investment, even if it's not billable, to have a pre-group contact because the outcome will be a more engaged and a better retained group member.
Thank you for that, Dr. Rodriguez. We have another question about facilitators. Question about, would it be beneficial for a facilitator to do a survey of the clinic before interviewing potential participants? And also, should they consider calling the participant before the session or just simply see if they arrive? I'm not really clear on the survey, but if it's a survey to find out whether there's a specific need, and if that's what you're alluding to, that does make sense. So in other words, a survey saying we're going to have a group and this is what the group is going to be about, and being able to complete that survey and possibly declare their interest in the group, I think that could be good. Again, other forms of pre-group preparation do include things like providing written material. A survey actually would fit into that in some ways because it would give people a sense of identifying what the purpose of the group is and maybe how that group might. And I think if it has the effect of giving the individual a heads up and an idea about what they're getting into, and is followed up by a one-to-one interview, I think that could be very effective. Wonderful. Thank you, Dr. Rodriguez. We're going to do one last question, and this is about participants. In particular, somebody asked the question, is personality ever a barrier? And if so, how would you recommend handling that?
Personality, so I think about personality in two ways. So personality just in terms of personality characteristics, then I think personality disorder. Personality disorders could be very problematic in group because going back to my original slide, oftentimes the people who have great difficulties in group are people with severe personality disorders. However, personality characteristics, so people openness or people who are less open, introverted versus extroverted, or other aspects of the personality should definitely be taken into account. And actually, that reinforces the idea of a pre-group interview, because if you have the pre-group interview, even though it's a different setting, one-on-one setting, you will definitely begin to get clues about how the person generally interacts with others by interacting with you. So you will get a picture of how, again, how introverted they are, how extroverted they are, how open they are, how closed they are. All of those kinds of aspects of the person's personality that you will want to know about prior to getting them in a group, and whether it's a good match for group membership.
Wonderful. Thank you, Dr. Rodriguez. So I would like to just close up here and say if you have any other questions, please contact us at ctac.info@nyu.edu, and our presenter's contact information has been up on the slide. We also have another webinar coming up. This is the first in a 4-part series. The next webinar will be on June 7th. This will be on group processes. And we also have some other upcoming events offered by CTAC, so please visit the CTAC website for more information. You can see the rest of the 4-part series here on the screen. And we thank you, Dr. Rodriguez, and everyone for attending today's webinar. As a reminder, the presentation slides and recording will be posted on ctacny.org in 1 to 2 business days. If you have any other questions, please contact us at ctac.info@nyu.edu. Once you leave today's webinar, you will receive a survey on the presentation, and we would greatly appreciate it if you would complete that and provide your feedback. On behalf of McSilver, CTAC, and MTAC, and our presenters, thank you for joining us today, and have a great rest of your day.